Welcome in the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter. And there he is himself, the Dean, Steven Lassan, senior editor over at Athlon Sports. How's it going, Steven?
Mike, I am still recovering from a fantastic Saturday of games, man, from 11 a.m. Central to, 3 a.m. I was just wired for college football, and what a great Saturday of SEC ball. So I'm doing great. I don't know about you, but that was a heck of a Saturday of games.
Well, the only thing you're not doing great at, Steven, and you're right there with Shane and I, you're my bookie, lock of the week. You missed it, as did both of us. So lesson to the audience, go over to my bookie, sign up for a free account, and if you use the promo code that SEC, that's THATSEC, they'll double your initial deposit today with that promo code, that SEC. Lesson, Steven, go over to my bookie, fade our blocks, and these cousins are going to be winners. You know what?
Yeah, fade our picks. Although, Mike, I think we went 2-1 on the prize picks. If like Trevor Etienne caught like one more pass for 2 yards, we would have been 3-0. So fade the locks, take the prize picks, I guess. Maybe.
Right. Yeah. How does Carson Beck have 500 yards and the running backs barely got 15? You know what?
Right. It seemed like such a obvious thing that he could get to 15, 16, 20 receiving yards, and he ended up with 11. So, man,
yeah.
We'll take winners though. 2-1's not too bad.
Hey, shout out real quick, cousin Dakota here. I sent him a Mizzou mug just the other day, just for being a member of the channel. So he says, got my Mizzou, that SEC podcast mug in the mail today. Thanks, cousins. Thank you, cousin Dakota. And if you missed it, on the last episode, we talked about it. Shane and I were going to do, for the members, the official cousins, we're going to do a Zoom call, family reunion, we're calling it, on Thursday night after the picks. This is not going to be recorded, so you're not going to get it anywhere else. But we're just trying to come up with ways to make it worth your while to go that extra mile and support the show. And heck, maybe even Steven will be there. I don't know. I don't want to speak for Steven. He might be busy.
SEC After Dark, SEC Uncut,
Exactly.
the unedited version.
Exactly. Well, Steven, before we get there, though, I love showing you this. I posted it online, so you may have already seen it, but updated SEC scoring efficiencies after 5 weeks of play. And again, very, very, very simple metric here. It's based on how many snaps you've taken on offense and how many points you've scored. That's how you get good on offense or poor on offense if you're not scoring. And then defense, same thing. How many snaps you faced, how many points you're giving up based on the snaps. And after 5 weeks here, Tennessee, Texas, Ole Miss, even though they just lost, and Alabama still remain in that elite category. And they're really in a group of their own with man, I hate to say it, but Hail State, you're all the way down there, bottom left, worst of the worst. But I think this goes to the point, Steven, and again, Ole Miss has feasted on an easy schedule. They keep playing like they did on Saturday. They're going to regress back to that middle of the pack. But I think the narrative out there, which is accurate if you're just looking off this updated SEC scoring efficiency, is we've got a couple elite teams, and then we have a ton where any of them can beat any of them. And right now, even Georgia's thrown into that mix. And I would certainly put Georgia more into that elite category, but they have faced several Power 5 teams. So I think that's kind of skews their grade a little bit. But what stands out to you while just looking at this SEC scoring efficiencies?
I think something you said there is kind of what I'm interested in moving forward is the elite category in the SEC, because I think Alabama, Tennessee, Texas, they all have, and certainly Georgia, of course, with the win over Clemson, they have those marquee wins so far this season. Alabama's win over Georgia, I think, is the best win in college football so far this year. But I think you're also wondering, Ole Miss is in that elite category right now, propped up due to the non-conference schedule. They have a chance to rebound, of course, going forward with South Carolina, LSU, and Georgia. So interested to see kind of where Ole Miss moves on this chart. Also, Georgia, with the performance they had, they have slipped a little bit on this chart, but at the same time, I think they're closer to the elite. But also, when you look at the teams, kind of the rest of the teams, there's a lot of clustering too, like Oklahoma, Missouri, both top 25 teams, A&M as well. So I think to your point is like, we're starting to see some separation. I think we know who's at the bottom. We know who's at the top, but we're trying to figure out that middle. And also the kind of the uncertainty in the middle of the league can also lead to that week to week chaos that we've been seeing across college football. So interested to see going forward how this chart changes, but also think it's starting to reflect sort of the real kind of life standings, if you will, in terms of separation.
Right. And I get a lot of blowback, Stephen. They say, well, hell, why don't you just do SEC? Well, there's only one data point for a couple teams, so it would skew it even more, in my opinion. But again, this metric is so valuable. 24 years in a row, Stephen, the national champion has a top 3 offensive scoring or top 3 defensive scoring. So not just SEC, but across the country. So those really are the metrics that determine how elite of a team you have and if they can win the national championship, as 24 consecutive years have shown. But, hey, I don't know if you saw this last episode, Stephen, but Cousin Danny, he said he's going to eat Wildcat poo if Kentucky beats Ole Miss. He said, I think I just discovered a new superpower. And then he comes back here, if Vandy beats Bama, I will eat nerd poop out of a red Solo cup with a spoon. So we'll see if Cousin Danny's superpower works yet again. You know what?
Oh, man. It's been strange. Sorry. I was just thinking about the I don't want to go into it because it's a family show, but the Kansas State BYU.
Yeah, let's not go there.
Yeah,
but
yeah. So, and also the Florida State guy too. Like he was, maybe that's been the downfall of Florida State. He didn't follow through on his bet. So yeah.
Exactly. Cousin Danny, you better come through here.
Yeah.
All right, so on with actual content here that Steven brings to the show. So again, shout out Steven. We've got your updated college football playoff projections. And again, this is a mix of what we have seen already and Steven projecting ahead. And again, I'll say it just as a refresher, because this is new to all of us, and particularly if you're just listening, that the top 4 seeds are going to go to the highest ranked conference champions. So Steven's got Alabama number 1. They essentially jumped Texas. Not of anything Texas has done, I would imagine, but just Alabama getting the big win over Georgia. So the SEC champ, Alabama. Number 2, Ohio State, Big Ten projected champion. Miami, cheating Miami with the refs down there, winning the ACC, number 3 seed. And number 4, Kansas State, the Big 12 champion. So even if, let's say, Texas is number 2 in the country, even if Tennessee is number 3 in the country in terms of rankings, they cannot be seeded for an automatic bye. It's only the highest conference champion. So I just want that to be known. But that means we're going to get a heck of a lot of great matchups in the first round. We got Texas, number 5 seed, hosting Boise State, number 12 seed. We'd have Oregon, number 8, hosting number 9 Penn State. We'd have Tennessee, number 6, hosting Michigan, defending national champions in Neyland Stadium. How awesome would that be? And then Georgia hosting Missouri. Those two have battled the last couple of years. That feels like a semifinal, not a first round game, but that's what we'd potentially have according to Steven. And then we've dropped Ole Miss, but they're still among the bubble teams, as is LSU, Oklahoma, and Texas A&M makes a debut in their bubble team. So I spoke a lot for you, Steven. Can you dive into some of these projections?
Absolutely. So I think we'll start at the top, which is something that you hit on in terms of the top 4 teams. And I think this is the thing that frustrates me the most about the expanded playoff is if you just did a pure power poll, Texas, Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia are probably 4 of your 5 best teams in college football right now. And Texas would drop to the 5 seed. You would have Tennessee at 6, and you would have Georgia at 7. So it is a little kind of frustrating for some of those top teams to be dropped, but this is the system that we have. So just keep that in mind as we go forward, that probably the loser of the SEC championship game is probably going to be the 5 seed. in this playoff bracket. But I think just looking ahead a little bit, think about how much this has changed from week 1 to now week 6. And we're going to see a lot more changes from week 7 to week 12 or 13 in the season. But Alabama jumps to number 1 because of that win over Georgia. Texas, nothing they did wrong. It's just that Alabama's win over Georgia is impressive enough to move them to the top spot. Michigan is a new team in the playoff bracket this week. They get Washington on the road, could easily see them losing and dropping out. So I think what we're kind of seeing here is some of these SEC teams like Georgia, still a lot of tests remaining. Tennessee, still tests. Same thing for Texas. But those teams should feel okay because the bubble right now is looking pretty soft. You can already see USC with a loss, of course, and you're still looking at Clemson with a loss too. So there is a long way to go in this, but there is a lot more margin for error for teams like Georgia, say Tennessee, if they were to stumble. Also, I think looking at the bubble, this week's game between Texas A&M and Missouri could be really significant for bubble purposes, given Missouri's schedule, given A&M's loss to Notre Dame, trying to figure out and trying to separate those two teams kind of as we go forward. So I think right now, if you're the SEC, you feel good about getting potentially 5 teams in there, and also the potential for teams like Texas A&M, LSU, Ole Miss to play their way back into this field. So right now, I think if you're an SEC fan, I think you're feeling good about how many teams you could get in later this season.
Yeah, and I just thought of something, Steven, just spitballing here. I probably should have had you consider it ahead of time, so I apologize. But let's say of the teams on the bubble, which one do you think is most likely to make a jump and finish in the college football playoff? And I'm just talking SEC teams here, of course. And then which one that you kind of have slated in the playoff among the SEC teams may be the least likely to finish in the bracket? Does that make sense?
It does. I should actually take a step back for a second, because after we posted, I think last week's, and how many Tennessee and Missouri fans wanted those two teams to play in the playoff, I'm almost rooting for a Tennessee-Missouri first round playoff game. But to answer your question, Mike, I think Missouri's the one team, like they're kind of on the bubble right there at 10. And they get the A&M game this week. They have to play Alabama. They got to play Oklahoma. And of course, they still have to play South Carolina. So they still have some chances on the schedule to rack up good victories. But if they lose to A&M and they lose to Alabama, Oklahoma might be their only top 25 win. So at 10-2, even though the record is good, they're going to need some quality wins. And I think they're going to need to have some style points to go along with that. So Missouri, I think, is probably a little closer to the bubble than, they're going to need to beat an Alabama and A&M maybe. My answer on the team outside to make it in might surprise you, but I'm going to go with Ole Miss here, because I'm not going to sell my stock just yet after one game. They still have LSU. They still have to play Oklahoma, Georgia. They got the big one against South Carolina this week. But I still think that this team has a lot going for it. So I'm not going to sell Ole Miss yet. If they lose this weekend, my answer might change. But I think they still have a good chance to make it in this 12-team field.
Well, I do appreciate the fact, Steven, that you are willing to shift these around. I see plenty of Texas fans mad in the comments, but again, Alabama's got a significantly better win than probably anybody in the country. So, I appreciate the fact that these can change week in and week out, and where Steven's got you today doesn't mean he's going to have you there next week. So that's kind of part of the fun in my mind. You know what?
Yeah, it's trying to react week to week to what we're seeing, and also trying to keep in mind, I always try to view this as like a preseason and an in-season exercise. And as each week goes on, you remove all your preseason priors and you start filling it up with results. We're still in that situation where some of these teams have only played, 4 or 5 games. Some of those games were so one-sided, it's hard to read a ton into them. But now we have actual data points. Like Alabama has the best win, Texas beating Michigan, and also the look test. Alabama, Michigan, Texas, and Tennessee and Georgia are, like I said, 4 of the top 5 teams in the country. So it's no slight to Texas. This could easily change in a couple weeks if Texas beats Georgia. So I feel very good about where the Longhorns and Crimson Tide are right now as the top two teams in the country.
Well, real quick, Stevens, we're going to get into your panic meter here in just a second, but I want to shout out cousin Steve here. He said, "Hey, I won $28 on my bookie, so I'm splitting it with y'all. Thank you so much, cousin Steve." And then shout out, what a guy, cousin JR gifted another membership. Thank you, cousin JR. This time to cousin Sven, who he could use some, he could use a boost. He's a Mississippi State fan, but he's loyal to the show. Whether they win or lose, he's here. So we appreciate you, cousin Sven, and appreciate you, cousin JR. But all right, Stephen, let's get into your updated SEC panic meter. And my goodness, there is a lot to panic about. I feel some weeks you may be stretching a little to panic, but I sense a lot of panic coming from you this week.
Yeah, I've got 4 teams. We'll start with the low end of the panic. We'll start with Georgia. Let's give them a 3 on the panic meter. I don't think there's, I guess maybe the way that I look at Saturday's game is the second half was peak Georgia. It was as good as Georgia could be. They could be the best team in college football. The first half, if that team, and we've talked about this coming leading up to Saturday's game, they have to get off to better starts. Faster starts are a must. And we saw what happened on Saturday with Alabama, unable to stop Jalen Milroe, unable to get anything going offensively, which cost them the game. Still have to go to Texas, still have to go to Ole Miss, still have to go to Tennessee, or still play Tennessee. So the schedule still has plenty of marquee opportunities for Georgia to make up for Saturday night's loss. Maybe in a weird way, this is the wake-up call that Georgia needed. I kind of thought that was the case after the Kentucky game. Maybe this is it. But I think just in terms of contending for the national championship, contending for the playoff, most of these things feel fixable. Like Carson Beck throwing interceptions, probably not going to happen in multipliers like we saw. And their defense is capable of playing significantly better. So I've got them a 3. Is that too high or too low?
May not be high enough, Stephen. So let me ask you this. I'm glad you ended on that. What concerned you the most from Saturday? Was it Carson Beck looking totally out of sorts? He looked like the moment was too big for him, and this is 2 games now in a row on a marquee stage against Alabama. Again, his statistics at the end of the day looked fantastic. He did lead a comeback. We got to give him credit for that. But, I mean, there was pick sixes that was dropped. There was the safety was really bad. Again, and you go back and study the film. You listen to the coaches. A lot of the mistakes were on the receivers. So it's not all Carson Beck, but there's no way even the most diehard Georgia fan could watch that game and by the end of the first half say, "Oh, he's great." You know what I mean? Like he melted down. Now, to his credit, he bounced back. But what is the bigger concern? That happened this season, or that Georgia was completely clueless on defense for the entire first quarter, which put them in this giant hole. And then you could say, well, hell, I mean, they shut them down in the second half. They did, except when it really mattered and they needed one play to score a touchdown on you. Like, never in my life have I seen Georgia's defense look that pathetic. What concerned you the most there?
Man, that's a good question. I will say I thought it was interesting after the game that Kirby Smart touched on something that you and I had talked about in the preseason or in the pregame, which was what would Alabama do a little bit different that they hadn't done in the first couple games. And they threw a couple different things at there. I talked about the coverage that they did and also some of the things they were doing out of empty sets with Jalen Milroe. So Alabama certainly threw a few new things at him, but I have never seen Georgia's defense look that out of sorts. They gave up 8.4 yards per play. That is the most since 2016 when they played Ole Miss. So it has been a long time before they looked that out of sorts. So, I to answer your question, maybe it's Carson Beck. He hasn't looked like the best quarterback in the country coming into the year. He was preseason All-America by most people. So I would go maybe with Carson Beck being my bigger concern, and maybe the greater concern is, a lot of Dominic Lovett, Dylan Bell, they all made good plays in that game. But again, in the clutch, you still got to have a number one guy. How much of that was a lack of confidence early on with no Bowers and McConkey? So I think getting Carson back to last year's level is pretty imperative.
Right.
Am I crazy to think that?
Um. No, but yeah, certainly they have to because of who they've got coming up. And I'm not saying Texas is going to score at will. I'm not saying Tennessee and Ole Miss. Certainly not Ole Miss after what we saw them play against Kentucky. But these teams can score in bunches, so you're not going to beat them by scoring 28 points or something. You know what I mean? Like, you may have to outscore a couple of these teams. But how about this statistic, Stephen? I referenced it on the last episode. Alabama rushing on Georgia between the tackle, 3 rushes, 8 yards. Outside the tackles, 22 rushes, 123 yards, 2 touchdowns. So that is stunning to me. And then I heard a statistic. I know you have the what is it, PFF stats, so you have the ability to look this up. I don't, but I overheard that Georgia has missed more tackles this season, Stephen, in 4 games than they did all last year. So these are major red flags. I'm not saying these can't be corrected, but these are red flags that should not be ignored.
Yeah, it's almost like these concerns are like 50-50 in my mind. As I promise I'm not trying to not answer your question. It feels like they're equally.
You're ducking me, Steven. No.
I guess the other thing you could look at this is Jalen Milroe is pretty special. Like,
right.
He was the best player on the field Saturday night. Ryan Williams was unbelievable too. There is sort of that element of Milroe plus Kalen DeBoer were just so good. They just outcoached Kirby Smart and they can adjust going forward. It is a little weird to sit here and go, they gave up 173 rushing yards. And, coming to the game, I thought, well, Justice Haynes and Jam Miller, they would try to do what Kentucky did. Well, I mean, Justice Haynes had 35 rushing yards and Jam Miller had 8. So it really was, like you said, Jalen Milroe getting to the edge. I mean, I still cannot get over the fact of how Georgia's defense was outplayed. If anything, it's just almost like reliable week in and week out for Georgia to play good defense. And the fact that Alabama's offense just dismantled them in the first half. And you could also say too, and I don't think it's crazy that Alabama was way ahead in the second half and they probably took their foot off the pedal a little bit. So how much of this is injuries? How much of it is new faces? Like you said, getting to the edge, and also the fact that Milroe had so many free throws, like the defensive backs were just way off the receivers. So yeah, long way of saying I am a little bit worried about their defense in some of these high profile games coming up.
Would you move Milroe to the top of the Heisman list after that performance?
Yes, I would. I think Travis Hunter from Colorado is having an unbelievable season. But we've also seen Jalen Milroe in the biggest stage of the year against Georgia just light up Georgia's defense. So I would move him to number 1 in my Heisman rankings.
Okay. All right. So who's next on the panic meter, Stephen?
Let's go with Ole Miss at 5. Mike is selling his Ole Miss stock. Here I am alone, still holding on to that Ole Miss stock for another week. So I've got Ole Miss at 5 in terms of a panic here. So I think in terms of playoff positioning, this team still a lot to play for, still very much in the mix. You've got LSU coming up, South Carolina, Oklahoma, the big one against Georgia. Plenty of time and opportunities to get back in the mix. What worries me, though, is the line of scrimmage. And we've talked about this with Oklahoma. You can't hide a poor offensive line in this league. And Kentucky with Deion Walker, Oxendine, those guys were so good on Saturday at just blowing the line of scrimmage up. Here comes South Carolina. Here comes Oklahoma. We'll see about Georgia, I guess. I still think they'll turn things around defensively. But they're going to have to play a lot better along the line of scrimmage. I would also like to see this team use some of the other receivers more. I mean, Trey Harris just totally dominated the targets and catches, and that's fine. But it does feel like they're going to have to get some of those secondary weapons going, especially when Jackson Dart was so pressured and maybe didn't have some trust in some of those other receivers. So I think a lot to work on the offensive line for Ole Miss going forward if they still want to be a playoff team, and that's why I've got them at a 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if they lose, I mean this week that we got to move it to a 10, Stephen, because
Yeah,
we never had. Of course, this new era, NIL, all this, but we've never quite had a team assembled like this. And how will they respond if they already have two losses and we haven't even gotten to the game that everybody had circled as their game of the year? Will players quit? You know, again, I don't want. I have no idea, but I think these are fair questions to ask. Their utilization of some players, like Uceli's Bentley, is just confounding. They won't run him, but they'll put him on special teams. He's not on the injury report. Yeah, I think they're banged up on the offensive line, and that clearly surfaced against Kentucky. That's going to surface again against their next opponent, South Carolina. This is a game South Carolina's had circled because of Juice Wells and many others, but South Carolina's getting no respect in the polls. This would be their opportunity. Of course, like if South Carolina wins, everybody's just going to say, well, Ole Miss overrated, they sucked, and that's not a good win. But in reality, that would be a good win. But the way South Carolina is kind of emerging right now, I mean, this is a very, very dangerous game, and a case could be made that the season is on the line for Ole Miss.
absolutely. I think it is a sort of backs against the wall kind of game for Ole Miss. All hands on deck. To your point, I don't think they can go to a 2 in the loss column and feel good about their chances of making the playoff, because they have to turn around and go to LSU right after, and they still have to play Georgia. So the schedule gets harder from here. I think you can also look at this from Ole Miss, and as bad as everything was on Saturday, if they don't fumble close to the goal line, maybe we're talking about a close victory here, and we're talking about how they need to play a lot better, but they survived. And that sort of kind of gets at the season for every one of these contenders is you're going to have a game that's close. You're going to have a game where you don't play your best, but can you survive, stay in the 0 in the loss column and keep going? But also these issues, for Ole Miss in a game where it was about styles, Ole Miss lost the style fight. Kentucky took their style and their will and imposed it on Ole Miss. I thought if Ole Miss got up 2 scores, I thought Kentucky was going to be in trouble. But I also think that Kentucky deserves a ton of credit here, because I was skeptical about the Bush Hamden hire. In 2 games against Georgia and Ole Miss, they have done what they needed to do in terms of sort of dictating the pace, dictating the style. Obviously, a long way to go offensively, but they've done what they needed to do in those games to try and pull off the upset. And the way that they kind of limited the overall possessions and big plays for Ole Miss had 60 plays. That's only happened like 3 times under Lane Kiffin. So 40 minutes to 20 minutes time possession, it was a total sort of, this is our style and we're going to impose it. And that's what Kentucky did. And that would worry me if I'm Ole Miss going into this weekend's game against South Carolina.
What are the odds Lane Kiffin was auditioning for the Florida job and losing to Kentucky like Florida always does now?
He did nothing to get rid of the Lane Whiffen nickname, did he?
No, he did not. All right. We'll stop kicking them while they're down. Who's next on your panic meter here?
Let's go with Arkansas this week. And I've got them at 6. So on one hand, this is 2 games now that Arkansas has had right in the grasp of victory and loss. That was the Oklahoma State, of course, earlier this year, and Saturday's game to Texas A&M. I think what worries me for this Arkansas team is the schedule coming up. Tennessee, LSU, Ole Miss, Texas, Missouri, all ranked teams. It's going to only get harder from here. The mistakes that have happened in close games. They've had 9 turnovers this year. 6 of those have come in the 2 losses. Small mistakes like penalties and things like that. So those were 2 winnable games, and Arkansas came up short. Are they going to be able to come back with that same effort, that same intensity, when the schedule is only going to get harder in a stretch where it's probably going to make or break Sam Pittman's job?
Mm-hmm. And this is the wrong opponent as well to have questions on the offensive line against. Tennessee is not the opponent that you want to get right on your offensive line? You know what?
Totally. A&M's defensive line is good. Tennessee's defensive line so far this year has been better. And I think that was one of the things that stood out to me on Saturday was you could tell, like in the fourth quarter, kind of game on the line, A&M's offensive line and defensive line kind of almost won the day for A&M in a close game. So this is where Taylor Green's mobility is going to come up big. But offensive line for Arkansas has got to play a lot better. Small mistakes have got to be cleaned up. They get Tennessee at home, but Tennessee's also coming off an off week, so it's a tough setup for Arkansas this week.
And I know that the rosters change now more than ever, by a larger percentage. But anything to the fact that Arkansas really needs to win a close game to start having that buy-in, because it's not just this team. This team's lost 2 now, one possession games, but going back 2-3 years, Sam Pittman's Arkansas program, I think they're now 2-11, 2-12, something like that in their last 14 one possession games. Does it need to happen before for that belief to set in? Do you think?
I think so. I think there's also, right now with the fact that Arkansas is 3-2 and they've had 2 close losses, it feels like the buy-in is probably still pretty high. Now I know some fans are probably just out on Sam Pittman at this point and probably ready to move on because it feels like the same thing is happening over and over again with the close losses. But what if they beat Tennessee or what if they beat LSU and they go to the midpoint of the season at 4-2, or they get to, they're still in the mix to make a bowl game. So I do think at some point with the schedule, if the close losses add up, I do think you worry a bit about the kind of positivity, the buy-in sort of eroding away later in the season with that tough schedule coming up.
Mm-hmm. And another reason I bring that up, Stephen, because again, if you just look at who they got coming up, Tennessee, LSU, both at home, Ole Miss, Texas, both at home, and Missouri on the road. You reference those games. But and a big if here, but if they're going to beat any of these teams, it's hard to imagine they're just going to destroy them. They're going to be close, hard-fought, one-score games. So you really got to turn the narrative around against better competition, which is obviously even tougher to do. But if you can beat Tennessee by 1 possession, all of a sudden I think you have belief that you can do it against LSU or Ole Miss or Texas, and on and on and on, if that makes sense.
That's a great point, because I think just looking at that schedule, Mike, it's hard to see Arkansas winning 45-10 over Texas, right, or something against Louisiana Tech. Yeah, absolutely. But those close, sort of how the close games, and we see this with some other teams in college football, you've got to find a way when you're at a talent disadvantage to close the door in close games. So Arkansas is going to have to change that narrative over the next 2 months of the season to, number 1, save Sam Pittman's job, and number 2, go to a bowl game this year.
And I guess it is his fault for how bad they were last year, but it's disappointing because this looks to me, I don't know about you, Steve, this looks like perhaps the best Arkansas team in 3 seasons, yet it could still be the one that gets him fired, fair or not. It looks to me like there's progress being made.
Absolutely. I think the coordinator combination of Petrino and Travis Williams, is pretty good. And for all the questions they had last year, the fact that there has been some improvement, certainly offensively on the stat sheet, and they tried to fix the offensive line, and you're seeing some improvement on defense. It feels like that's working out. It's just that they just can't get over the hump in these close games, which has been a trend under Sam Pittman. And at the same time, you look at that schedule and you're looking at the bye week starting to add up. You're wondering where this goes if the losses keep adding up.
Mm-hmm. All right. So there's one team we haven't hit on, Steve. We do this every week with the panic meter. Give it to me.
The Auburn Tigers. Mike, I've got them at 8. Is that too low?
That's too low, Steve. My goodness, Steve. They just lost to Oklahoma, starting a true freshman. First time Oklahoma in their storied history, in over 100 years, had a true freshman, first start, win his debut, down 5 receivers. And hell, I'm singing the praises of Oklahoma's defense, but I won't say Auburn had their way with them, but Auburn had a ton of success against them. This was freaking Hugh Freeze being stupid, going 5 wide, throwing the football up when their running back seemingly could not be stopped. They refused to give Jarquez Hunter the football. I don't understand what in the world's going on. And I don't know if I didn't catch it. It must have been today, Stephen, but because I didn't catch, I listened very closely on Saturday to see who's he got to throw under the bus. He didn't throw anyone under, but today, I think it was like a lineman or something. Just, well, our starter would have made the play, yada yada. You know what I mean? Like there's always an excuse, but yeah, I mean this is on Hugh Freeze at this point. You should be at worst 4-1 with this schedule that you had to open the season. All 5 at home. You're sitting here at 2-3, and short of upsetting Georgia, short of upsetting Alabama, both of which are on the road, there's no way in hell that any Auburn fan is going to look at this season and say, you know what, this is a big success here, because we're staring down the barrel of, again, minimum 7-5, and that would be giving them at Missouri, at Kentucky, A&M win, Vanderbilt win. I mean, I don't know how many of these games they're going to win.
I knew I could just tee up a number and you would be able to just knock it out of the park. Way better than I have. So I probably am a little bit on the lower side of the panic meter. I will also say, I think in terms of the schedule, this is the first week that when doing my bowl projections, I did not have Auburn in the bowl projections. I'm having trouble finding 6 victories for this team, absent an upset or two. I also think Saturday, and forgive me for diving into the numbers here for a second, but I mean, when you outgain a team 482 to 291, and you have 26 first downs to 11, you should win that game. And it kind of goes at the season here for Auburn, which has been catastrophic errors are holding the team back. You mentioned the kind of questionable play calling. I totally agree about Jarquez Hunter. I feel like he should be getting more opportunities week to week. They are 27th in the country in success rate now. They are averaging about 7.6 yards per play. They are at the top of the SEC in big plays this year. I know they've played some questionable competition, but it's the turnovers. It's the questionable play calling at times. It's the offensive line, quarterback play, you name it. I mean, the stat sheet tells me this team should be, like you said, it should at least be, 4-1 at this point. And they're sitting here at 2-3 in a game where Oklahoma basically did nothing on offense outside of those 2 big plays and scored on defense. So another kind of confounding loss for Auburn, to say the least.
Mm-hmm. And then, so that rounds out your panic meter this week, right?
Yes, it does.
But I think you missed one. I know they won. I can't trash Auburn and then sit here and praise Oklahoma. Stephen, what the heck was that? I mean, without the gimme interception, they don't win this game. And again, there was things to build upon, but mistake after mistake after mistake on the offensive side of the football. I'm concerned about Oklahoma.
I am too. I think if you wanted to take the optimistic route here, is that maybe they can get some of their receivers back by October 12th. Now, of course, beating Texas is a pretty tough, and then they still have to play Ole Miss, Missouri, and Alabama and LSU. So it is going to be tough. But maybe you get some receivers back. Maybe Michael Hawkins can progress over the next couple weeks, and maybe you found some things on the offensive line that you can build on. So I think maybe the way that I look at this is Oklahoma found a way to win in some pretty tough circumstances, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. But I also think that they're going to have to play a lot better to be able to go beat South Carolina, to beat Ole Miss, to beat Texas. I mean, I know I just mentioned the numbers, but they were outgained 482 to 291, 11 first downs. I mean, basically 3 big plays for Oklahoma decided that game, which was Michael Hawkins' long run, long pass, and the interception return for a touchdown. So they won the moments, but it's going to be hard to kind of count on that down the road and being able to get those big plays like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, it's not the worst. I mean, you win a tough road game. SEC, you never apologize. I sound like one of these damn coaches now. You never apologize for winning on the road in the SEC, but that. See, my dog's pissed too. All right, but how about this one, Steven? Again, not on your panic meter. Maybe they shouldn't be, but I got to bring it up. Come on, Texas. Come on, Texas. 35-13 over Mississippi State's just awful. They're the worst team in the conference by a country mile. Florida proved that by winning on their field. And again, you beat them by 20-something points. You look sloppy. Maybe I'm overreacting, but what Mississippi State did to Texas, I think that's the blueprint Oklahoma will use in the Red River to try to upset them. Any panic at all for watching Texas? They didn't look SEC ready.
I would say pretty low. I would maybe give it a 1 or a 2 because maybe it's the sloppy play, like you mentioned. It's a couple fumbles. It's not finishing a drive. It's a drop pass, like things like that. You hope one game doesn't become a trend. I'm guessing it won't. I think on the side of giving Mississippi State some credit here, for all that has gone wrong for Mississippi State this year to be a 30-plus point underdog, Jeff Lebby and the staff had the right plan, to your point. They tried to slow it down, 7-minute drive to start, run the ball. Michael Van Buren, for all things considered, his first start, I thought he held up well in a pretty tough environment. So I'm not that concerned, especially when you'll get Quinn Ewers back, some of the sloppy play, you get some guys back healthy overall. I think Texas is going to be just fine.
Okay. Well, I just had to throw it out there, Steve, because I was appalled by that performance. But nonetheless, let's move on. Let's do we're over 42 minutes in, Stephen, and we haven't even hit the preview, so let's get into it. But first, I got to remind the folks, MyBookie online sportsbook. Go on over there, put in that promo code, that SEC, and fade our selections. And I mean, there are no guarantees in life, Stephen, but that's about as close as you're going to get. Go over to MyBookie, using that promo code, that SEC, to double your initial deposit and just fade us. Fade us all the way to the bank. You will not be sorry. So, big time weekend here in the SEC. Stephen, let's preview it up here. I don't even know which game is the game of the week because there's so many good ones. But let's start with Missouri at Texas A&M. SEC Nation's going to be down there. Texas A&M's a slight favorite, which is forcing Cousin Shane to chug milk on our Wednesday episode. But thoughts on this matchup, Stephen? Missouri, undefeated, top 10, but are they of that quality or not? This will be the game that kind of determines it.
Kudos to Cousin Shane for picking something very safe to do for losing a bet instead of the other stuff. So I think to answer your question, I think it feels like a game we're going to find out a lot about both teams. For Missouri, pretty easy start to the season. They've had the off week. Can they get some of these things offensively sorted out with the big plays, get Brady Cook on track? And I think for A&M, I think the formula that we've seen so far this year, Florida kind of was maybe a little bit of an outlier because of how bad Florida's defense is, but we saw it on Saturdays. Play good defense. Maybe it takes them a quarter to figure it out. You get Marcel Reed making some plays on the ground, and you also get Le'Veon Moss getting stronger as the game wears on. So I'm very interested to see how Missouri's defense matches up against that A&M offensive line and rushing attack. And the same thing too, like Brady Cook and this Luther Burden going on the road, tough environment, College Station. What can they do against that A&M defense? And it feels like a game, like I said, we're going to learn a lot about both these teams. And it's also going to mean a lot in terms of playoff positioning. And I hate to go there this early in the season, but given where these two teams are so far, it feels like it's a pretty important one for both.
Mm-hmm. And do you give any edge to Missouri for having 2 weeks to prepare for a matchup like this?
I do, and especially because A&M and Arkansas had such a close game, and also I think kind of the emotions and rivalry angle to that game against Arkansas. Always like the team coming off the off week here. So Missouri, I know they haven't hit on big plays, but maybe you give them a little bit of an edge here because Cook and Burden, and also the 2 weeks to prepare. So I'm interested. It's hard to find which way to lean so far early in the week, but I think if you could probably find some reasons for both to feel good.
Mm-hmm. And as I got the stats up here, I mean, both are Missouri's number 20 in rush defense, Texas A&M 36. But the way, and these are efficiency numbers, of course, but the way A&M corralled Arkansas, which has been elite on the ground, gives me confidence that they're even better than this metric suggests. Which leads me to believe that each defense is going to force the other quarterback to beat them. And Brady Cook, certainly in the past, has been capable. I would not say that he has shown he is capable this year. Doesn't mean he won't, but he hasn't shown it. And I would say the same, fair or not, about Marcel Reed. Not that he's not capable, but I have not seen him beat an SEC defense with his arm. Of course, he's not had many opportunities. So let me ask you this way, Stephen: which quarterback do you have more faith in this matchup to win this game on Saturday if they force the quarterback to win it?
Brady Cook. I think there's a part of me that thinks that this is the week the switch goes on for that Missouri passing game, and Brady Cook and Luther Burden maybe make one or two plays, and that ends up being decisive here. But I will say on Marcel Reed, like the one thing that he is doing is not making a bunch of mistakes. And for a team that's got a good defense and you can run the ball and you're sort of finding yourself as the season goes along, there's still a lot of upside for Marcel Reed to grow into this, especially if you're being efficient and you're not making a bunch of mistakes. And I still think A&M's got to find like the guy who can consistently make plays in the passing game downfield, whether, whatever receiver it is. So it feels like the supporting cast for Brady Cook could be pretty valuable in a game where, both these two teams have combined for 27 field goals this year. Like finishing drives is going to be really important. And also both teams at the bottom of the SEC in plays of 40 plus yards. So this game might come down to who can hit the 2 or 3 big plays here, and also who's scoring touchdowns instead of kicking field goals. As weird and basic as that sounds.
Mm-hmm. And again, I ask you this every week, so I guess I'm just going to keep doing it all year because Elko says the quarterback's going to be a game time decision week in and week out. So I might as well ask the same question week in and week out. If Connor Wigman's 100% ready to go, no lingering issues, you're sticking with Marcel Reed, or are you going to Connor Wigman?
I'm sticking with Marcel Reed.
And is that mostly because he's not making those mistakes? He's winning week after week after week. And again, I'm not suggesting he's a bad player by any means, but he got better as the game went on against Arkansas, and that was the difference. So, I mean, if we could get that Marcel Reed like we did at Florida, I thought he was fantastic. But all those issues that you reference, who are these receivers that are going to make plays? Le'Veon Moss has started to show up more and more for the Aggies, but it's pretty bizarre to see the lack of weapons. I'm used to A&M having more talent on the offensive side of the football. Even if you switch out the quarterbacks, it's not going to help that in my mind, and you're taking away Marcel Reed. His biggest attribute right now is his running ability.
And that's why I think he should be the starter. It's really because if you are concerned about maybe your ability to get receivers open downfield and make those big plays, a quarterback who, he's not a statue, but at the same time, Marcel Reed brings that X factor element of being able to use his legs. And so I think I would stick with Marcel Reed almost until he proves that he's not the guy for the job, or Connor Wigman just in practice is just so much head and shoulders better than Marcel Reed, because I do think, and I like the skill set that Marcel Reed has. I think he just needs more experience, and they need more help around him too.
Mm-hmm. And this is an impossible one to answer, but I was just thinking out loud, Stephen. And I'm not saying this is the case in College Station, and I'm not saying this is the case in Norman, but don't you think it'd be fair to say that we are in an environment where, again, I'm speaking totally out of my butt here. I have no knowledge of what these players are getting in NIL, but I think it's safe to assume Wigman's getting a lot more NIL than Marcel Reed. I think it's safe to assume Jackson Arnold is getting more in NIL than Michael Hawkins. And not that the coaches are sitting here making decisions based on NIL, but there's that. There's 5-star status, so all the fans believe, that the five, we got to start the 5-star, right? He's got the highest ceiling. Do you think any of this plays into any of these decisions? Why guys like, because we just the limited basis we have seen Michael Hawkins, he looks a lot better than Jackson Arnold this season, and I would say the same about Marcel Reed with Connor Wigman. Do you think any of that, even if it's like 1%, is playing into some of the decisions of who to start at certain spots? And maybe not even those guys, but just all across college football.
Maybe the way that I look at this is short term versus long term to some extent. Like if you're investing in NIL dollars in someone, like I'll use Jackson Arnold as a hypothetical. You see the talent, you see his potential. You're investing that, hey, he's going to be our guy for maybe the next 2 years, maybe 3. At the same time, though, he's not the right guy for right now. And it seems like Michael Hawkins is the right guy. So I don't know that necessarily comes into play because if you're a coach, you've got to win right now, especially in this era where 2 years you can get fired right away. So I tend to think that you have to weigh a little bit of short-term, long-term, but at the same time, you're trying to figure out what wins tomorrow. And I think tomorrow it's Marcel Reed and Michael Hawkins for those 2 teams.
All right, let's get into, again, I don't even know where to go, Steven, because all these games are like equal footing for me. But I'm very intrigued here. Ole Miss coming off their first loss of the season at South Carolina. South Carolina's had 2 weeks to prepare for the Juice Wells Bowl here. And again, we're trying to figure out who is Ole Miss. Are they the team that looked unstoppable the first month of the season, or are they more the Kentucky loss, or maybe is it somewhere in between? What's your early read on this matchup?
Dangerous game for Ole Miss, I think, because like you said, South Carolina has had 2 weeks to get ready. They are also lying kind of in the Juice Wells Bowl, waiting over the last couple weeks to emerge here. So I think a lot of the intangible factors favor South Carolina. Ole Miss caught a break with this not being a night game. South Carolina at night with Ole Miss coming in there. What a heck of an atmosphere that would be. But so they get a little bit of an edge with this game being earlier in the day. I think the question that I'm trying to figure out as we're evaluating this game is South Carolina's defensive front with Dylan Stewart, Kyle Kennard, Debo Williams at linebacker. Can they do what Kentucky did on Saturday, which is dominate the line of scrimmage, get Ole Miss off the field? And if you're South Carolina, when you have the ball, Sellers and Sanders doing the same thing. Style of play, win the possessions, keep Ole Miss on the sidelines. It's, you get Ole Miss on the road a week after they lost at home to Kentucky. This is a very dangerous spot for Ole Miss. So I think we're going to find out about Ole Miss's ability to rebound, because this has the chance to spiral into a couple of losses if they are not focused and they have not addressed some of those offensive line issues or figured out a way around it going into a tough spot against a good defensive line.
Mm-hmm. And similar to Kentucky, going into that matchup, Stephen, we said, low scoring obviously favors Kentucky. High scoring would favor Ole Miss. I think it's safe to assume South Carolina's built very similar to Kentucky. So same deal, right? Like if either one of these teams reaches 35 points, probably going to favor Ole Miss to win this game. If it's a game in the 20s, I may favor South Carolina. What's your thoughts on that?
Totally agree with you. At the same time, I'm also thinking that LSU South Carolina game was 36-33, and South Carolina nearly won that game. I know they came up short, some reasons, but I do think if I'm South Carolina and I'm kind of projecting the perfect setup, it's like a 24-20 20-17 game like we saw against Kentucky for Ole Miss. I think the higher scoring, if Jackson Dart's playing well, they're hitting the big plays, that favors Ole Miss. I think if you're South Carolina, a slower, low possession game favors you much more than a higher scoring game does.
And I believe, I don't think it's officially been announced, but I believe Lenora Sellers is expected to play for the Gamecocks, so that would be a big boost. I know Robbie Ashford had a solid outing against Akron, but still, much rather have Lenora Sellers. Now, do you think? I was stunned, Steve. Quite frankly, I was. That I know Kentucky's got a good defense, but the fact that Ole Miss could not run the ball on Kentucky, will they be able to run on South Carolina? Do you think?
Man, that's the $1 million question. I mean, because I think with South Carolina's in the 50s and 57th and rush defense efficiency so far this season. I think you have to feel, if you're Ole Miss, I think you have to feel maybe a little bit more confidence that you can, just simply because you've now played a game against Kentucky and it gives you a chance to work through some of these maybe issues that you were seeing up front. And like you mentioned, they've had some injuries too. So there are some things to work on there. There's a little bit of there's a challenge to some extent of reading into South Carolina's rush defense stats, because they've played Old Dominion, they've played Akron, and they've played two teams who, Kentucky and LSU, who probably aren't running the ball particularly great right now either. So I think there are going to be some opportunities here for Ole Miss. I don't think it's a 100% favorable matchup, though, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just fascinated by this game. And maybe you're right. Maybe it was, of course, it was just the one turnover last week, but that really halted the momentum. And Ole Miss, again, they came right out the gate, Steve. Right out the gate, scored a touchdown. I was thinking, lock of the week, we're good. They're going to kill them. And then they virtually did nothing outside of the long fourth down play. But I don't know. I mean, season is on. I cannot understate it, Stephen. I think the season's a complete failure if we lose next week, because I think it's going to go right down careening off a cliff. I think if we win next week at South Carolina, we make the college football playoff. Like I think it's that divergent. I really do. So big game from Ole Miss.
Because Ole Miss's over under was what, 10.5, I think, this offseason.
I think 9.5.
9.5. You lose this one at 2. I think it's going to be hard to run the table the rest of the way. So it also just feels like I don't want to say a kind of program defining moment, but I think it will be interesting to see how Lane Kiffin can keep this team together and also sort of refocus them in a very difficult environment where the game could play out very similar to what happened last week. So I'll be curious to see if they make any adjustments. Also, just to see, kind of like you said, it is sort of a backs against the wall kind of season defining game here for Ole Miss.
And the Florida stuff's not going away. You know,
it's only going to get worse if they lose on Saturday.
And Florida hadn't even fired their coach. Goodness. Okay. How about this? This could be another. I think this is going to be a good game. I'm on an island here, Stephen. Tennessee at Arkansas. I get it. Arkansas just lost. Tennessee's, been very, very impressive. They had 2 weeks to prepare. Thoughts on this matchup, Stephen, where, again, if Arkansas quit shooting themselves in the foot, they're going to beat a team like this. They can beat, I think, virtually anybody on their schedule if they quit making the mistakes.
I think that's a fair observation, Mike, because on one hand, Arkansas, you wonder about what is left in the tank at some point, because when you play a game like Auburn, where you were on the road, it was close. Then you turn around and play a rival in Texas A&M. It was close, another 4-quarter game, and you came up short. And kind of compounded by the loss against Oklahoma State too. So I do think there is I think they'll be fine on Saturday, but you do wonder at some point if the tank runs a little empty, close game after close game. But it's in Fayetteville. Tennessee's had 2 weeks to get ready, which favors Tennessee. Also, I think the matchups in this game, though, they favor Tennessee. Just the ability to stop the run, the ability to get after Taylor Green. I'm still curious to see what happens when Tennessee's secondary faces a quarterback that is capable of stretching the field. You could almost envision a scenario where Taylor Green makes a few plays on the move, throws downfield to an open receiver or two, and Arkansas creates some big time passing plays that way. So I'm very interested in that Taylor Green Tennessee defensive front matchup. On the flip side of things, I think if you're Tennessee, having 2 weeks to get ready and a week to forget about the emotional win at Oklahoma, that really favors Tennessee on Saturday night.
Mm-hmm. And someone was asking, I believe it was cousin Anthony, what's the over under? It's 59.5 for this matchup. So projected to be a high scoring game. But I think there's always a danger, Stephen, for a young quarterback on the road. I mean, Nico made some big time throw. He didn't, all this Heisman stuff. That's crazy talk. Again, they beat Alabama, beat Georgia. Get back to me with Heisman. So, but he did make the plays that had to be made against Oklahoma, and no one's going to credit him for it, seemingly, other than Tennessee fans. But those were the plays that defined the victory. So he may have to make some more of those, but there's no given. Saturday night on the road. Again, I get it. He just did it. But can you count on a true freshman to do that 2 out of 2 games? I'm not saying you can't, but I think these are situations that make for upsets in college football.
I think thinking about the Tennessee offense against Arkansas's defense, I think something that just kind of stands out to me is the fact that Arkansas has played Oklahoma State, who is pretty much one-dimensional right now. They've also played an Auburn offense that's not very good, and they've played Texas A&M, who I think still kind of evolving.
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee is going to be the best offense that Arkansas has faced this year. What worries you the most about Tennessee in this spot on the road against Arkansas? Is it just the mistakes, the environment factor going on the road in the SEC?
Here I am trying to make it a compelling game, Stephen. You're like, what? They're going to roll them. They're going to steamroll them. But no, I get it. This likely will be the most complete team. I guess it's just 20 years, 30, however long I've been watching Tennessee football. It's just, and it seems to be slightly different under Josh Heupel, but there's always that game where they let get away. Now, Josh Heupel's got an outstanding record. I think he's like 6-1 after a bye. So maybe again, I'm just kind of making excuses here, but I have seen Taylor Green, and when he's on, he's very good. Again, Tennessee's secondary, how good are they? I don't know. I don't think anybody knows, because I guess we're just going to keep saying that week in and week out until they might be in the national championship. I'll be sitting here saying, well, have they really been tested? I don't know, but
Mike, if you look at their schedule, I mean, it is Jalen Milroe, Carson Beck, really, right? I mean,
right. So I mean, they will be tested clearly by then. But I don't know. I just think that going on the road, tough environment. If Arkansas does not turn the ball over, which, to your point, they do that in every game they've lost. They've turned the ball over. But they're going up and down the field on Oklahoma State. They punched A&M right in the mouth. They probably should have won last week, but they couldn't protect, which that's going to be a major issue in this football game. But I don't know. I think I'm trying to pump the brakes on Tennessee hype here.
I think there's always a danger, and this might be the most cliche thing ever, but it always, when you look at the schedule and you see it's well, there's not that many high profile matchups.
Mm-hmm.
What happens? Chaos
Right.
always happens, and we're due for some upsets along the way. So, we'll talk about picks on Wednesday, but I would feel decent if I'm Tennessee going into this matchup. Now, it is a look ahead to Florida and Alabama, but also we talked about this in the preseason. When you looked at Arkansas' schedule, the home slate, it felt like they're going to get somebody this year. And the way they've played against Oklahoma State and A&M, if they can just do the small things well, Taylor Green goes off, Landon Jackson plays as well as he did last week against A&M. This team is dangerous in Fayetteville for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it sounds like you already tipped your hand, Stephen, to picking Tennessee lock of the week. So, well, again, that's just going to give me more confidence that Arkansas can pull this off because we all know fading our locks is the way to go. But yeah. What? Anything else before we move on from this game? Sounds like you're just a typical Vol fan here, Stephen, thinking Tennessee's going to steamroll everybody in the country.
I'm just hyping Tennessee up, and then on Wednesday I'm going to pick Arkansas.
All right, how about this one, Stephen? A nice rivalry here. I don't know how competitive it'll be, but Auburn at Georgia. Man, oh man, does Auburn need this one to kind of turn around the season? All those Hugh Freeze haters. I don't even know if he has haters, but if they're out there, they'll all be kissing his rear when he wins between the hedges here. Georgia's hurting. They have no offense except for when they're down by 50 points. Their defense got exposed last week. Tell me why Hugh Freeze going to have a masterful game plan here and beat Georgia.
Well, Mike, he's going to spend all week. He's going to be dialed in to the offensive game plan. It's going to be all Hugh. And at the end of the game, when they rack up 500 yards and Peyton Thorne throws for 300 in a close win for Auburn, Hugh Freeze is going to take all the credit. That's exactly it.
Then he's going to take the Florida job.
Right. He's out of here after that one. No, in all seriousness, Mike, I think what it interests me right off the bat for Georgia is, can they avoid that slow start here? Because I think back to last year when it was a close game. It was on the road at Auburn. It's a rivalry. So, it would be like the most Hugh Freeze thing to lose to Cal and beat Georgia. That would be like the most Auburn type of season they could have. So I think you'd like to see Georgia get off to a better start. And if you're Kirby Smart, take control of this game. Don't let Auburn hang around and potentially pull off the upset. If it's a 7-point game in the fourth quarter, it is a rivalry, but I think that'd be a little bit concerning for Georgia. So I want to see Georgia bounce back, but also I want to see Auburn. I know that they have had problems with turnovers and everything like that, but if they can clean some of that up, we talked about the success rate, what they've done down to down. There's potential here. Knowing what Alabama did to Georgia's defense in the first half, they might have some success moving the ball with some consistency.
And I call you the college football encyclopedia for a reason, Stephen. You may have already looked this up. You may be already cheating, but I did not prepare you for this, so I'm just kind of curious if you know the answer. When is the last time Auburn won in Athens?
Off the top of my head, I don't remember. It's been a while. A little bit, hasn't it?
It's been a long time. Tommy Tuberville was the coach. Right. 2001 was the last time Auburn won in Athens, and they have only beaten them 4 times since 2001. So, again, all the rest have been at Auburn. So that's got nothing to do with this game necessarily, but just, quite frankly, yes, Auburn does pull these upsets, but they're almost always at home with that Jordan Hare magic or whatever, which I don't think they got any this year. I mean, they've already lost 3 at home. You know what?
How does Sooner magic and Jordan Hare magic, like, did they?
But any concern, though, again, that, like, what if Georgia looks like they did against Kentucky? I mean, it seems somewhat realistic if they play like they did against Kentucky. If they not that again, spread's like 24 points. It'd be crazy to suggest they lose this game, but if they look rough, like if they win 20-10 or something crazy like that, how big of a concern would that be?
I think it would have to be a 10, like on a panic meter, wouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because at that point, if you look at the season for Georgia, I mean, the second half comeback against Clemson was great, and they beat Tennessee Tech. But outside of that, I mean, they beat Kentucky by 1 point, and they needed a massive second half comeback to avoid getting blown out by Alabama. So if this game is close, that's alarm bells for me for Georgia.
Now, on the flip side, again, I know I've mocked them to no end, but Auburn, I mean, they found some good success even against Oklahoma. I thought they were clicking. I thought there was no way they're going to lose that game. We don't have to rehash that again, but Peyton Thorne, that was his best game I thought he ever had as an Auburn Tiger until the very end. And I blame the coach again for putting him in empty, throwing the football. No need for any of that nonsense. If Peyton Thorne, these receivers are starting to heat up. Keandre Lambert Smith is awesome. He looks like one of the well, I mean, there's so many good receivers, but maybe a top five-ish type receiver right now in the SEC. I don't think that's too bold when you look at his numbers. And if they just feed Jarquez Hunter, just feed him. Like, what in the hell are we doing? Feed him. Peyton Thorne has a ton of success. I mean, there's a blueprint there for Auburn to have success here, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talked about the numbers early on, like the per play rate, the success rate, they're all good for Auburn. It has just been like catastrophic, silly mistakes that have held this team back. And it's not just mistakes, Mike. It's to your point. It's kind of weird, kind of play calls at times, not using Jarquez Hunter. But I mean, if I'm Auburn, I'm sitting there going, "Hey, Alabama. I know Jalen Milroe and Peyton Thorne are way different on the quarterback rankings, but you've got good weapons at receiver. Figure out how to deploy them and get the ball in space to these guys and let them create and see what happens here." Because Peyton Thorne coming off 338 passing yards, the big mistake, obviously, but that was one of his better games. So maybe there's a little bit of confidence coming into this game for the passing game for Auburn.
So if I were to tell you, well, real quick, Cousin Shane said he's going to starve himself until we get to 150 likes on here. And he says he just bought a Subway sandwich too. So do not let him starve, people. This man needs to eat. But if I were to tell you, Stephen, that Auburn's offense continues to progress, like a similar performance to last week, minus the epic turnover, if they have their best performance to date on the offensive side of the football, do not have a catastrophic turnover, let's just say no turnovers, would you give them a puncher's chance to beat Georgia?
I would give them a chance, but I think it's pretty low.
Right.
Anything can happen in a rivalry, so I'm always a little hesitant. You always give the underdog a chance here, and especially I would motivation could also work here for Georgia just because of how I think poor they played in the first half and things looked a lot better in the second. But there should be some motivation to maybe put together their most complete performance of the year, and what better time to do it than Auburn coming to town?
Right. Yeah, I'm just saying. Yeah, Hugh's a great coach. All right, how about this one, Stephen? I don't know how much of a matchup this is going to be, but Alabama at Vanderbilt. Admittedly, though, this is the best Vanderbilt I've seen since, I don't know, James Franklin, maybe. I mean, it's been that long. Vanderbilt's had 2 weeks to prepare. Trap game city, I think, Stephen, with Alabama, the toast of college football. They're going to win it all. They just see Steven Lassan put them number one in the playoff poll. You know what I mean? Like Alabama's on cloud nine. DeBoer, he's doing double time in his tanning bed this week, I think, to look extra golden to face these Vanderbilt Commodores. Thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, I think that's the storyline for this week is like letdown. And you've already seen like the traps out, the trap pictures of the traps, the rat traps around, the facility in Tuscaloosa there. Vanderbilt is going to need everything to go right, plus Alabama to have the letdown factor here. I do think, like you said, this is certainly Clark Lee, I think it's his best team at Vanderbilt, and also one of the probably more improved, one of the biggest surprises so far through the first month of the season. But it's going to require Diego Pavia to shine. It is going to require Clark Lee with 2 weeks to prepare to have better answers at slowing down Jalen Milroe. And I also think you're going to need some mistakes by Alabama. Maybe it's a couple turnovers, special teams, play for Vanderbilt. So it's going to require a heavy lift. But at the same time, if you're Vanderbilt, getting Alabama a week after beating Georgia, that's pretty good for timing purposes, at least.
What areas do you think that Vanderbilt could have some success aside from some Diego Pavia magic in this matchup?
Man, that's a good question. I think I would probably look at attacking the corners of Alabama. Now, they held up well in the first half. Obviously, they gave up a lot of yards in the second half. How much of that was the defensive game plan? But still, I mean, these are a young group of corners plus transfers trying to mesh. So can you attack them? Obviously, Vanderbilt has some questions at receiver. So I would start there. Like I would take some chances with Pavia throwing him downfield, much like they did against Missouri to start the game.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately for Vanderbilt, I mean, it's just a reality of the situation, though. It is a home game, but there's going to be nothing but Alabama fans
Yeah.
there come Saturday. I mean, that's just the current state of that program. But I hope I'm wrong. I hope there's a lot of students and everything. I know they've had to turn students away. I hope it's something like that. You know what?
Man, I hope so for Vanderbilt's sake, because I would love to see this be a close game and a 4-quarter game on paper and based upon the spread. I think it favors Alabama. But, if you're Clark Lee and you're trying to build a program, like what better way to try and take a step forward than to have a big time performance on the spotlight when Alabama comes to town? So, there's probably some, recruiting things, program building things that Vanderbilt could really impress if they have a good showing on Saturday night.
Now, how about this one, Stephen? Last one, not the only non-conference matchup, but this could be a thriller here. Central Florida at Florida. Big time showdown down there. And goodness, Stephen, I mean, I didn't realize this. Central Florida is currently now listed as the favorite in the swamp. You cannot have this if you're Billy Napier. Tell us about Central Florida here.
So it's our old SEC friend, Gus Malzahn, coming back for UCF. There are a ton of transfers on this team. You may recognize some of them. Of course, like KJ Jefferson is their starting quarterback. Kobe Hudson is one of their top receivers. So I expect a very high-scoring game on Saturday night. This season, UCF is 3-1. They've beat New Hampshire, they beat Sam Houston State, and they beat TCU. They lost to Colorado 48-21. Probably one of the weekend's biggest surprises. UCF was favored by almost 2 touchdowns, and they got beat pretty bad by Colorado. So they're coming into this game, I think, a little wounded, trying to figure out where they are this season. There is no question that they can score points. They've got Jefferson, like I said, at quarterback. They've got a deep stable of running backs. Defensively, when they've played power conference opponents this year, and that is 2 of them, TCU and Colorado, they have given up 41 points a game. Also, their rush defense numbers look good. I am here to tell you that is probably not how good that defense is. They were last in the Big 12 last year against the run. They have played Colorado and they have played TCU, who cannot run the ball consistently. So I would say if I am Florida, Montrell Johnson and that backfield, there is a prime opportunity here to maybe push around UCF and sort of keep the Gus Malzahn offense off the field and sort of play to your style on Saturday night.
Mm-hmm. Well, that being said, Stephen, this are the type of games Billy Napier loves to drop here. So, oh, buddy. I mean, buddy.
Can't lose this one if you're Billy Napier, right?
If he does, he's got to be gone, right?
I kind of thought it was going to happen earlier this year, so I'm honestly a little surprised that he's still there as of October, early October. I think maybe looking at Florida's schedule, maybe the kind of breaking point here is October, 19th, 20th after that game against Kentucky. Obviously, of course, Florida's got a lot of administrative things they're trying to figure out, AD, president, all that. Maybe that's holding up the decision here. But if you lose to UCF, you're not beating Tennessee, and I don't think they'll probably be Kentucky this year. So potentially staring at 2-5 going into the game against Georgia. That seems like a fireable offense to me if you're the Florida coach.
And, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephen. Maybe I am, but this doesn't feel like a game where you can get a ton of momentum either, because it's almost like your fans are demanding you win this. You're an underdog. Or, again, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe could they win this one in an impressive fashion and then sit here and say, man, let's hit a run. Let's go beat Tennessee. Is there much to gain if you're Florida in this one?
Potentially. I mean, I think maybe the best way to kind of look at this is if I'm Billy Napier and I haven't been told anything and I'm still the head coach of Florida, is if you win this game, you still have a chance. you could go beat Tennessee, you could beat Kentucky. All of a sudden, we're sitting here at 5-2 and talking about, well, Florida could have a chance still to go to a bowl game. It is a pretty heavy lift, but you're also in one of those. This is one of those non-conference games where it's not the best opponent when you're in a must-win situation. And to your point, it's not an SEC opponent. So what do you gain out of this situation? Because if you don't play well, Billy's going to hear about it on Saturday and Sunday. And if they lose, it's going to be even worse. So I think maybe the best case scenario for Billy Napier is just to come out and take care of business, win by 10, 14 points with the off week, show some improvement on defense, and get to 3-2 before you go play Tennessee.
And then on the flip side, though, this, again, they just lost a big game, so maybe this doesn't apply. But I would imagine this was like the Super Bowl to Central Florida, Gus Malzahn, KJ Jefferson, to more Gus than anything, but just to prove that he's got a program on the rise. I know they're technically Power 5 now, right? But I don't think anybody really truly honors that who covers us. No one in the SEC, certainly. So this could be a statement type win for his program, don't you think?
Yeah, I do. And I think you nailed it with sort of, it's like the Super Bowl for UCF to some extent. It's, a lot of players at UCF in Florida, Miami, Florida State, they play high school ball together. And then, of course, they go to different schools. And now UCF going on the road to play Florida is a chance to make a statement against an in-state school. For the most part, the other in-state schools really want nothing to do with them when it comes to scheduling. So it's an opportunity to go on the road in Gainesville and get a big-time win for Gus Malzahn. Some SEC revenge. KJ Jefferson destroyed this defense last year. So certainly, I think a lot of motivation for UCF here.
And then, of course, let's hope Florida wins this one for our sakes. I always hate when an SEC loses to a out of conference team, but then, oh buddy, I guess Florida State's awful too. So we'll take them out. But the murderers row of SEC, and all of a sudden Kentucky's gaining steam here. All off season we talked about the schedule, and the silver lining was, well, who knows? Some of these teams may not be as good as we project them to be. They're all looking all of them are looking better than Florida.
Yeah, it's tough to find guaranteed wins. I would assume, well, I shouldn't assume, but I would guess maybe Florida ends up as a slight favorite over UCF by Saturday. But other than that, we'll see what happens with Florida State. But there's not a guaranteed win on the schedule because Georgia, Tennessee, Ole Miss, Texas, LSU could all be playoff contenders or are already playoff contenders. So it was important for Billy Napier, I think, to make up that ground, to make the case for another season early in the year, and he didn't do it. So now it's going to require a massive upset or two to sort of change that narrative.
Mm-hmm. And, shout out, Stephen, real quick here. Cousin James gave us a donation. What do you think South Carolina's record will end up being? I see 6 or 7 wins with upsets at Ole Miss, either Oklahoma or A&M. Love you guys. Thank you. We love you too, Cousin James. Let's throw up their schedule real quick. Just based on what not making predictions for all these games, but best case here. What do you think is the record for South Carolina?
So I think right now at coming into the season, I think I had them at like 6 wins, and I feel even better about this team, than we did back in the off season. Certainly, Wofford, Vanderbilt. I would think they'll certainly be favored against Wofford, and I think they'll be favored against Vanderbilt. That gets you to 5. A lot of these games are winnable. I would probably go with 7-5 right now if I'm South Carolina. I think, like I said, I feel better about this team. If they win this Saturday, I think maybe you kind of bump that total up a little bit closer, maybe to 8 wins. Is that fair?
I certainly, and I was going to say Oklahoma they get Oklahoma after they play Texas. I think that's advantage Gamecocks. They get Missouri after Missouri plays Oklahoma. That is advantage South Carolina. So, there are some things to like here. Let me look at A&M real quick. I'm kind of curious who they'll get. And they'll get A&M right after LSU. So, in that regard, I like the way the schedule lines up, if that makes sense. So yeah, give me about an 8-4. I think for South Carolina the way they're playing, and who knows, they beat Ole Miss. I may up that even higher this weekend. You know what?
I think there was a question coming into the season about, is South Carolina a bowl team? Like, could they get to 6 wins? And I think that's for sure. I think the question is it going to be 7? Is it going to be 8? Could even be a little bit higher. There's a lot of timing plus favorable matchups. It was probably the Alabama game is probably the one they'll be the biggest underdog in, but Ole Miss coming in this week, and like you said, the Oklahoma, the timing of Missouri, A&M, it all works out really well for this team. And I think the fact that they can get better. I mean, Lenora Sellers can get better during the season. They've now had an off week to reset. I think there's a lot of promise for the South Carolina team, but I'd probably stick with 7-8 right now as kind of my projection if I had to make one.
Oh, we got a couple more here. Steve, appreciate you, brother. 10 is worth a couple likes. Eat already. Shade is on a mission to get to 150. And then cousin David, appreciate you, brother. Won't be an upset with Ole Miss this weekend. Revs out for a black. And I mean, certainly, I think that could be the case. I mean, they may blow the doors off South Carolina for all I know. Of course, I thought that they were going to do that to Kentucky, but they didn't quite do it. But and then real quick, we also had this, Stephen, Artie, Florida Panthers just became a member. So thank you so much, Artie. Welcome to the family. But hey, Stephen, we went a little bit long here, pushing 90 minutes. Any closing thoughts before we wrap this one up?
Mike, we had a crazy good weekend of SEC ball last week. I can't wait for the rest of the season just because of how many high profile matchups. It feels like every week there's a Super Bowl in the conference. So great first month, even better matchups on tap the rest of the way.
And Shane asked me this, so I'm just kind of curious because I know you're as big of a college football nerd, or just football nerd in general, but college football nerd as we are. 6 games on tap in the conference. Do you prefer that, or is that the magic number? Or I was telling Shane maybe 7, because the way it lines up, there's only one early game. I like 2 games on at a time, but one will do. And then we get 3 in the mid window, 2 in the late evening. What is Steven Lassan's preferred method of watching SEC? I'm just curious.
I would prefer to have 2 games on early. I mean, this Saturday with just to have the massive matchup sort of in each window was pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I will always take that. But at the same time, though, I always feel like the night is overloaded and the daytime, the 11 Central, 12 Eastern window is a little sort of shortchanged on games. So give me another game at the start of the day and sort of space them out the rest of the way.
And then one more. This just came to mind. I know you. Quite frankly, just let the audience know. Steven has let it be known. He's like, hey, if I'm available, you need an emergency podcast, just reach out. So we may have to do that here in the near future, Steven. But let's say an emergency podcast is needed on Saturday without revealing your picks or anything. Again, Missouri at A&M. I don't know if there's one there. This is a great candidate. Auburn at Georgia. Somehow, if Auburn was to win, Ole Miss, South Carolina, Alabama at Vanderbilt, Tennessee at Arkansas, Central Florida. Which one of those games do you think has the highest percentage chance of requiring an emergency podcast, if that makes sense?
Man, that's a good question. I can just see the title now. Auburn upsets Georgia. Hugh Freeze is the greatest coach. Mike, it's like the most glorious podcast for Mike to record on Saturday after the game.
I don't know if I'd show up for that one. I think I'd call in that day.
That might be the time to get the clown out the deck, right?
Exactly.
I would probably think it's the UCF Florida game. Billy Napier in Florida could lose, hot seat again. It's time to fire him. I think that's probably your most likely emergency podcast this week.
Okay, I think that's the right call.
Yeah.
Well, Steven, as always, really, really appreciate all this knowledge, all this information you're passing along. Before you go, can you remind the audience how to follow you, how to find your work?
Absolutely. You can check out all my work at athlonsports.com. You can follow me over on Twitter at AthlonSteven and Stephen L. CFB over on Facebook and Instagram.
All right, Steven. So that's going to do it for this episode of the show. We appreciate each and every one of you for hanging out. Even you, Cousin Shane. Thank you so much. Your night off here. We do appreciate it. We'll catch you on the next one.